Hello and welcome to Sex Talk with Natasha. It's Wednesday night, 10 p.m. Central. So excited to have you. I am thrilled to have a guest tonight. We're going to have a little bit of a different format than we normally do because we're going to talk about the World Health Organization and this new diagnosis that came out in June in the ICD-10 called compulsive sexual behavior. And if any of you know me or have followed me in the past, you know that I have great issues with anything that has to do with sex addiction, and it's interesting how this is getting covered. And so anyway, we're going to talk all about it tonight and give you hopefully lots of good information that will help you understand some of this stuff from a clinical perspective, etc. Before we get started, we're just going to give Ashley Pacini a chance to give you a little bit of an overview about what Sex Talk with Natasha is about. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to her. She's our producer.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. We're excited to be here as always. We're excited about tonight's topic, at least to have a really good conversation about what's been going on. And so thanks for joining. So we have, for those that are just joining us for the first time, this is an hour-long program, and we kind of divide it up. And tonight's a little bit different. So we're not going to follow the traditional format, but we are going to continue with the first 30 minutes are going to be free on Facebook, but the entire episode is going to be over at patreon.com/sextalkwithnatasha. So if you want the full episode, please go over there and become a subscriber. There's tons of benefits that you get, from community discussions to obviously the Facebook Live Q&As, direct access to Natasha, to daily actions to help combat sexual shame. There's some great videos up there too about how to talk to your kids about sex. So please go become a patron. There's some great resources, lots and lots of content on there. And oh yeah, that took me a lot faster than I expected to say. If anybody does want to see Natasha professionally, please go ahead and check her online practice. It's Symmetry Solutions. You can find it at Oops, are you guys there?
Yes, I'm here.
I think I lost you. I think my connection's bad this time.
Okay. Well,
I just got one of those unstable connections.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you're the problem and not me as usual.
It's my fault tonight. It's my fault tonight. But that shouldn't affect you guys because the recording and the video should be through you guys. So anyway, I don't know how much you guys heard of that, but we're excited to be here, and I'm just going to turn it over to Natasha. Okay.
Yeah, thanks. So you were saying that you can contact me at Symmetry Solutions, which is symmetrysols.com if you want to get a hold of me. And tonight I have Larry Siegel with me. He is an ASEX certified sexual educator and really played a huge role in helping me at a time in my professional life when I was really grappling with a lot of my own kind of thought process on how to make sense of a lot of the language that we're seeing used in regards specifically to sexual addiction and sexual compulsivity. And I went to a presentation that he and his brother did at ASECT, probably about 4 or 5 years ago now, I think. Yeah. And it was phenomenal. And it just kind of clicked all the pieces for me that I was already thinking, and it just organized it all. So my brain went click, 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 kind of like your spine vertebrae, you know, and a chiropractor. That's what happened to my brain during Larry's and Ricky's presentation. So it was very useful. And so I'm really excited to have him on tonight to help me talk about this. I just want to start off by saying that, again, right before that conference, the conference either before that or maybe during, maybe it was the same conference. It was in Minnesota. Was that where I saw you present? Was it Minnesota?
I think so. Yeah, I think it was Minnesota.
I was raising my hand a lot in Minnesota. Let me just tell you, like all my colleagues knew me, did not want to be seen with me because I was like, what is going on? And I don't get it. And what do you mean this is what you're saying? I don't agree with you. And one of these people that I did that to, and I guess I didn't realize how important he was at the time, or maybe I wouldn't have raised my hand, but was Eli Coleman, who comes out of University of Minnesota. And he was talking about how they were slated to have this sexual compulsivity disorder diagnosis slated for the ICD-11, which is just what's now coming out. And so I was raising my hand and I was like, okay, but all these criteria that you're mentioning, how do people who just feel guilty about sex, they like meet all this criteria, and why are we going to be pathologizing people who just feel guilty about sex? And he was like, oh, no, it's not meant for them. It's just meant for the people who really are like having too much sex. And then I'm like, well, who gets to decide what's too much sex, right? And so then so I just kept on raising my hand, and then I was like, well, how are the therapists going to know that this is how you're organizing this criteria? He's like, well, we're going to train them. And I'm like we've trained all the people in Wichita, Kansas that are like sex addiction treatment centers all over the place. Like, oh, I was like having a lot of raising hand moments. Poor Eli probably did not like me very much. So I was really terrified, and several therapists around me who actually happened to be from the Midwest came up to me afterwards and they're like, where are you from? And I was like, the Midwest, the Bible Belt. And they were like, oh, us too. We had the same questions. And of course, those of you who know me, that comes from Mormon background myself, it's all the Book of Mormon Belt. So this is a big issue that we want to talk about. So why don't I turn the time over to you and just have you maybe do a better explanation than me as far as what has actually happened. What happened as of June 2018 in regards to the ICD-10, which a lot of people may not know what that is, and how does that compare also with the DSM-5, which is what we use here in the United States as far as classifying mental health issues?
Okay, well, first of all, it's so great to see you, and I'm really glad to be here and talk to you about this. I just, any opportunity I have to see you and to be with you is always just a wonderful opportunity. So I just love the chance to do that. Basically, the ICD is, I guess they're included in their inclusion. I'm not gonna pull anything back. I'm tired, so I can use that as an excuse of not maybe watching my words as carefully. But I would basically say that the World Health Organization caved to the sex addiction industry. And I think, well, part of it is caving into that industry, but another part is the realistic purpose of the ICD is reimbursement. And I think that's part of the caving as well, because the sex addiction industry is all about just, I think, taking advantage of people and making money off of their guilt and shame. And I think that's just kind of been codified by the World Health Organization by including this compulsive sexual behavior disorder in the ICD. Now, the ICD is used by medical professionals. It's healthcare professionals. The DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, is what we use in mental health. Right? Now, this is not a diagnosis anywhere in the DSM. We don't use that diagnosis anywhere in mental health. In fact, the whole idea of addiction really isn't a clinical term or concept, except now that it is part of the DSM, but the ICD, but like gambling addiction. That's the only one in there. Right? Now, the sex addiction industry is and always has conflated the idea of compulsive sexual behavior with their ideas of sex and porn addiction. And first of all, even if I accept the idea of compulsive sexual behavior disorder, which I don't, it's qualitatively different than any concept of addiction. And let's also keep in mind.
Okay, go ahead.
Let me just throw in real quick that even in the ICD, when including compulsive sexual behavior, to be clear, it is not in the section on addictive and substance use disorders. It is under the section of impulse control disorders. So right there, that should take any steam away from these sex addiction people who are trying to use this to justify that concept.
Okay, so I'm going to just break that apart because there's already three things I want to talk about that I think people get confused about. So one is this idea of reimbursement. So if you go to see a therapist and you want your insurance to cover anything that has to do with mental health, you have to have a diagnosis that is covered in the DSM-5. So for example, if you want to come to me for couples counseling, that is not covered in the DSM-5. Now, if one of you happens to suffer from, let's say, clinical depression, or one of you has an anxiety disorder, and as part of your treatment for clinical depression, we decide it's good to bring in your spouse, then that type of family therapy is covered by insurance. But just classic, we're fighting as a marital couple, that's not a diagnosis, right? That's not supposed to be covered by insurance. So as therapists, there's always ethical kind of dance arounds that people will do to kind of fit people into these diagnostic criteria. Now, my issue with this even being a problem is that I have 3 reasons why the sex addiction paradigm does not work. Just very simplistic reasons.
Only 3?
Well, only 3. These are wide sweeping reasons, right? When I try to organize my thoughts, for people. One is that usually if there is an, let's say sexual behavior that has become maybe like a problematic coping skill for somebody, usually what's really going on is that there's an underlying diagnosis like clinical depression, like anxiety disorder, like PTSD, like whatever. And so you're using donuts or porn or money or whatever in ways that maybe don't fit your idea of health and balance and wellness. And that's not porn or sex's fault. That's just like your underlying diagnosis. So we don't need another diagnosis of compulsive sexual behavior, because if there are compulsive sexual behaviors, we need to figure out why those behaviors are happening. So that's one thing I want to say. And then the second thing, which I think you were getting at, is that compulsive behaviors, which is part of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, where you have compulsions and you have obsessions and you have compulsions, right? So you have like thoughts like this, and then you do something to help those obsessions. That is not. So I'm going to have you talk a little bit about compulsions, because compulsions are not generally things that people do for pleasure, right? In other words, if I have to wash my hands 500 times because I'm needing to get rid of this thought that maybe I have germs or whatever, that's not a pleasurable type of thing. And it's really something that you don't feel like you have a lot of control over, but it's not pleasure-based, which most people that are using porn and masturbating and all that are having some sort of pleasure, which gets me to reason number 2 of why this is a problem, which is people have a conflict between their values and what feels good and their behaviors. And so because they're doing something that feels good in the moment and, ooh, I shouldn't be doing that, then, oops, I'm having sex addiction, right? So it's kind of like my donut addiction, right? Because I shouldn't eat 10 donuts, but I do eat 10 donuts. I must be addicted to donuts. That's values moral discrepancy. And then the third reason I give is that there's really criminal activity going on. And the reason why sexual addiction label is so dangerous with the criminal aspect of sexuality is that it excuses predatory behavior. I'm an addict. I can't help it.
Absolutely. I mean, that's really that, so much of what that whole idea sits on. It's not my fault. It's that classic, I don't know if you're old enough to remember, Flip Wilson, as a comedian in the 60s and early 70s. And he would do this character, Geraldine, and it was always, the devil made me do it. Right? Don't blame me. It's not my fault. The devil made me do it. I'm not old
enough to remember this, Larry. I'm happy. I usually am old enough to remember a lot of things.
Well, I try to bring out references that'll make you feel good.
Thank you.
So I think that's really a core of why we should be objecting to this. And your first point, I would say, first and foremost, no behavior that people like to call addiction. And I really don't believe in any kind of behavioral or so-called process addiction. None of these things are primary issues in and of themselves. If we do see people using behavior to try to medicate, that is symptomatic of an underlying issue. And as you already pointed out, most likely some kind of anxiety, some kind of depression, PTSD, trauma, dissatisfaction with their own lives, ego dystonia, whatever you want to do. There's something driving that behavior. And the people in that industry have always missed that point, that what they're looking at is a symptom. Something is driving that behavior, and that's what we need to get to. You know, when you talk about OCD and compulsive behavior, things like that, somebody we both tremendously admire. I know he's been on your show before, he's been on my show, and just, you know, literally wrote the book on, you know, the myth of sex addiction. David Lay once said something that I just absolutely love. He said, people that suffer from obsessive compulsive disorder suffer all the time. People that suffer from compulsive sexual behavior only suffer when they get caught. And I think there's something, you know, real to that. There's a legitimate criticism that that rests on. You know, this. First of all, let me also put this up, because people in the sex addiction industry and people that really buy into that concept, man, this is. I mean, it's getting them all kinds of excited. This is, you know, a red letter day for them. They feel this vindicates them. But again, if you look at what they're saying with the compulsive sexual behavior, and we look at what they're really referring to, it actually disqualifies virtually everything people want to talk about with porn addiction and sex addiction. It kind of eliminates all of that kind of stuff, because it is all shame-based. It is the behavioral disconnect. It is these values and belief conflict, or values and behavior conflict. We see this with all kinds of quote unquote addictive behavior. These are moral conflicts. These are religious conflicts. People's beliefs and their desires aren't matching, because what people want and what they think they're supposed to do are not in sync, and that becomes the source of the identification. We're also looking at something that the vast majority of people identify themselves with. Right? Compulsive sexual behavior is not just another euphemism or just another word for sex addiction. People in the industry, that's what they're saying.
Well, and that's what's so frustrating when I look at the media and how it's getting reported, is that they're completely conflating these two words. Clinically mean very different things.
Absolutely. But then you get the major proponents of sex addiction, people like Stephanie Carnes and Rob Weiss, who have no qualms about saying, doesn't matter what you call it, it's all the same thing. I call addiction, you call it compulsive, it's the same thing. And I think Rob Weiss even said something like, you know, no matter what you call it, an alcoholic's an alcoholic.
And this is another point I definitely wanted to bring up today, this argument that it doesn't matter what we call it. If somebody is coming in and they're sick in this way, then hallelujah, now we have a way to treat them. So again, it conflates the fact that we've always had ways to treat these issues, like you're saying, that are underlying. And second of all, I think it really matters. I think if I go into a doctor's office and I'm going to get treated for diabetes, or I'm going to get treated for cancer, I think it really matters. There's a vast difference on best standard of care practice depending on what you're assessed with. And why we go to school for as long as we do is for correct assessment. It drives me crazy when these therapists are saying it doesn't matter what we call it, because, you know, if it's bipolar or depression, who cares? Because you use the same method, right? Or if it's
only if you don't know what you're doing.
Exactly.
And you know, one would think in this age of Trump, how many times have we heard words matter?
Words matter, yeah.
You know, and it really does. And see, and this is where I also do take issue with even the idea of compulsivity with sexual behavior. Right? Are there times where we can say there really is a true compulsive nature to this behavior? Yes, we can. When we're talking about things like issues with the brain, frontal lobe, temporal lobe damage, these bilateral temporal lobe lesions that lead to truly out of control, non-volitional sexual behavior. But you cannot tell me that the person who is going to strip clubs or is seeing prostitutes or is having affairs, what, they're in a fugue state, they black out and their bodies just, you know, take them wherever they go and they have no choice. This is volitional behavior. This is conscious behavior. They're making a choice. They're just feeling guilty and want to get out of it. Right? Compulsion, right, is easy to claim. Right? People say this all the time. I mean, I hear this constantly. I mean, I find myself these days telling people to stop saying that, you know, and in any number of contexts. I can't. This has become almost the American credo. I can't. Fill in the blank. I can't stop. And again, unless there are these real organic brain issues, when people say they can't stop, they're saying one of two things. 90+% of them are really saying, I don't want to stop. And then the other ones may be, I'm afraid what would happen if I do. Right? We're talking about this sort of self-medicating behavior. Well, yeah, what happens if I take away my medicator and now I'm left alone, naked with my anxieties, with my traumas? They don't know how to deal with that. That I get that. I really do. But again, that's still a choice.
And
it's still not compulsive.
And it's
right.
not a dependence like substance dependence, which I keep saying this to a lot of, you know, my audience is I worked with heroin addicts the first 2 years out of my graduate school practice. And I've never, ever had a porn addict throwing up in my office the way I did have heroin addicts throwing up or shivering or having the sweats or having all kinds of physiological, very noticeable withdrawal symptoms from certain substances that their body had become dependent on for that period of time that it takes to not be dependent. You can die from those things if you
Absolutely.
too quickly, right? Or things like that. Nobody is going to die from stopping watching porn. And so I think a lot of times, I know we're at the point where we're going to stop the Facebook Live and continue with Patreon. So please consider joining us for the rest of this discussion. It's really important. But where I want to go next is that oftentimes, I think the people who get flustered about us talking like this are the spouses or partners that feel damaged by the behavior that their person has betrayed them on. There's been a breach in the sexual contract. And what I want to just say really quickly before we go off Facebook Live is that the addiction model actually enables that. It does not help you hold your partner correctly accountable. So not that we're saying, oh, there's no such thing as porn addiction, therefore your spouse should be able to do whatever the heck they want to, and you as the partner should just be okay with it because, you know, there's no such thing as a disease here. What we're saying is that actually this actually doesn't help your position and an empowerment in being able to understand how you want to contract sexual behavior in your relationships and how to manage those things when they go awry and why. And you can still have empathy and you can still have compassion. You don't need a disease to be able to offer those types of things. So with that, Facebook Live, we're saying goodbye. Larry, you want to say goodbye to Facebook Live? And we're going to
bye Facebook Live. Right. Sleep well. Have a great night.